What's up, barbecue family? Joe Mill here with Killer Miller Q coming back to you live bright and early. We got a two-part series kicking off today on putting together your brisket. First off, we'll be going through how to properly prep your brisket, get everything all trimmed up and ready to actually cook, and then make sure you tune in for the second portion of this video, and that's going to be going through actually smoking your brisket, and then we're also going to be putting together some burn-ins. Before we get there, you can also find the same information up in the description, but make sure that you check out some of the things that you're going to need for today's prep. Obviously, we're going to get a brisket today from Costco. Try to get your meat to be choice or better. It always lends a better product when you start with good meat. So keep that in mind. Costco is a place where you're probably going to be able to get your best bang for your buck as far as the price and the quality. Other than that, you're also going to need, I'm using a boning knife that I'll also throw in the description as far as a link to get that off of Amazon, at least the one that I'm using, as well as I'm also going to be using one of my general kitchen knives. Whatever you have can work, just make sure that you got the sharpest knife that you can get your hands on. Other than that, we're just going to need some paper towels so we can actually dry this brisket off and get a lot of that blood and all the stuff from the purge in there, as well as also some gloves. That way you can go ahead and handle the meat. Won't take too much time. Let's dive right into it. So I wanted to bring you in close so we can really talk about this brisket before we go ahead and start breaking it down. First things first, we got it out the package. Make sure when you're taking it out the package, be careful. Don't let all that blood and stuff run all over your kitchen or your sink or this, that, and the other. There's a lot of potential diseases, things like that within there. Try to keep that, they call that the purge, in the bag. And then go ahead and get rid of all of that. Take those paper towels and we're going to go ahead and pat this dry all the way completely over on both sides. And get rid of all the blood and the moisture and everything off of the meat. From there, as we're looking at this brisket and kind of thinking about the anatomy of what we're seeing, and then I'll kind of get into what I'm about to do on this trim, and then also how I kind of picked the brisket when I chose it. Not that it's always perfect or science, but with that said, you do try to look for a couple things. One thing is I kind of look for more of a thickness. First off, you have your point section here. Your flat section here, which is more lean. And then over here in the knotty end or this bigger end is what they call the point. The point is where we're going to be able to actually get the burn ends from. This is more of the fattier meat. A lot of times when you like in Texas or a lot of the pip places where they're just going to slice up the whole brisket, they'll ask if you just want the lean or the fatty. Pretty much that's either going to be coming from the flat or from the point side. The lean being the flat, point being the fatty. So now we got an idea what we're looking at. Believe it or not, this is actually the meat side. There's some hard fat on here that we're going to get rid of. It's usually in a couple places called the deco. That would be right here, and literally this stuff does not penetrate. One thing that's cool that you'll be able to see is we're going to be going through how you make tallow. And instead of buying tallow and then turning around and then trying to put it on your smoker to get the smoke flavor in there, if we're going to buy the brisket, let's just use all the trimmings. That's something I learned along the way that helped me out a ton. And then also made me not feel so bad about being able to do some hard trimming on the initial portion of the brisket. It actually made my cooks come out to be a lot better. A lot of this thinner meat that's down here on these edges will be some of the stuff that's actually going to burn up before the end of this cook. So it's better to actually remove that ahead of time. Take it off of here since it doesn't burn up. It's kind of like popcorn. You don't want to get that one burnt popcorn kernel in the overall bag. We don't really want to get any of those burnt pieces onto the rest of the meat. If we can get it more evenly all throughout, everything will cook all together and you'll come out with a much better product. And then what I've learned to do is I actually save a lot of these trimmings and then I'll turn around and make ground beef with it, or you can do sausage or something like that, which I haven't done, but we will have a video on that soon. So anyway, jumping back into this thing, we're going to be removing this deco. I'm going to be showing you how to make some tallow with all of this fat that we're going to be taking off of this thing. Here on the meat side too, you always have this silver skin, which is just basically a barrier stopping my rub from getting in here into my meat and seasoning it off the top. So I'm going to remove it. Now in the backyard, you can leave a lot of this silver skin. I mean, a lot of this stuff will render. It'll be just fine. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. We're definitely going to clean up this deco and some of this other fat. Let's flip it over. This is the fatty side. One thing that you'll always find usually is you're going to have this cavity area where there's a lot of fat that we're going to remove some of it. There's usually another harder end on the back end of deco fat that we're going to have to remove. And then overall, we're going to be trying to get ourselves to a nice quarter inch or something like that of fat, which is almost kind of similar to what we're seeing right there. And basically that's going to act as my protector once we actually do start smoking this meat. Okay, the one thing that I will throw out there quickly that I do like to do is we're looking this thing over, and again, this will be your point side now that we got it upside down. This will be the flat. Okay, this is going to be the fat, that's going to be the lean. One thing that I do like is I like to clean up these edges. Usually you might see them and they're going to be a lot more gray. But a lot of times what happens is as they're actually cutting this brisket off at the meat plants, it gets like washed with a hot water and it'll actually halfway cook that meat. Nothing's wrong with it. So again, this will be saved when I'm using those scraps for the ground beef or the sausage or so on and so forth. But we'll go ahead and clean it up. It'll give us a nice edge. It'll also let us know what we're looking at as far as marbling, and it'll give me a better idea of how much fat that we have overall on this whole brisket. So let's jump into the trim now that we know a little bit more what we're looking at. So like I said, we're going to even this baby off, get rid of some of these hard spots of deco, get this fat to be more of an even 1/4 inch all the way around, take out some of these big coagulated chunks of fat. You can really, go as heavy, or, some people really don't like to do a lot of trim to their brisket. And then some people like to put in a lot of work and actually take a lot off. It's totally up to you. But with that said, I like to think of it like this. Get rid of anything that you don't want to eat now. And that way it can cook a little bit faster. But then on the back end, I don't want to serve that. And then we'll kind of go from there. Hold tight. Okay, let's get into this trim now. I see here one thing is they got you'll see this sometimes, a little bit of a gash in the meat. Nothing you can really do. It is what it is. But I'm going to start off with my boning knife. And I'm just going to start hitting some of these basic areas. One thing that I do look for that I said I would tell you about is what do I look for when I'm actually buying a brisket. One thing that they talk about is when you're grabbing it from this hand with both ends, and I only got one glove on, this is my cutting hand, but when you're grabbing it from this end and you're in the store, it should be able to have some flop. So basically being able for this to actually do some folding over. That'll let you know that maybe you might have a tender brisket on the back end. One thing that I definitely try to see, and usually I can kind of see it through the bag on the point end, I try to look to see what does the marbling look like. Along this side, I try to see if there's more of the fat that's kind of running along the seams of the meat. Not so much of these clumps of fat, because the clumps of fat are going to come off, and at the end of the day, they're going to be things that actually are stopping our rub from going in there. But more of the fat that's more in the meat is going to be the meat that actually turns out to make this meat or flavorful. So I try to see if I see some good marbling in the point area, where you can see some of that, as well as, the flat area, as well as throughout the flat area, over here, as well as throughout the point. And from there, once I can see that I got some good marbling, I got a little bit of a bend. The other thing that I try to look for is when I'm looking at these ends, and I talked about this a little bit before, I look to try to find one of the briskets that kind of has a thicker end. Sometimes this can get really skinny. Regardless, I'm going to be ending up rounding off these edges. So this is going to become a little bit more circular by the end. But at the end of the day, if this is more uniform and more even, that's less meat that I have to cut off to kind of start. The other thing that I always keep an eye out is, and I'll kind of feel for it on the package, is how much deco fat is on there. There's going to always be some. You always usually have two big hunks, but sometimes you can see some where literally it's pretty much the majority of the whole brisket. In that case, I don't want that. I try to stay away from those. But those are usually the couple things that I do look for when I'm actually picking out my brisket. But from there, now let's get into some of this trim. Working with this silver skin can be a bit tedious. And understand that I'm no professional. I'm just someone that took a little time to try to get a little bit better at it. One of the things I like to do is sticking my knife in there the long way. And then from there, just getting a nice long strand of fat. So at the end of the day, it'll cut that off. I mean, yeah, cut into the meat a little bit, but if we can see that, that's really not that much. I mean, when you're talking about a brisket there and being able to start cleaning that up, that's decent. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do, more or less all over. Now this is definitely a personal preference thing. Some people will leave the majority of this deco and do a very, very light trim. I think I've said it before in some of my other videos. I've usually always been one that likes to take a lot of my fat off, unless it's, like I said, in some of the areas where I think it's actually going to help to give me either a barrier of help or actually go ahead and lend me towards getting more flavor in my brisket. Other than that, I like to have a nice clean palate. The other thing that I think on this too, and again, this comes down to personal preference. I used to do, when I cooked my brisket, fat side up. And the arguments always were that you would hear, and it sounded great to me initially getting started, which was as the brisket cooks, more or less a lot of that fat will render and it will basically baste your meat, which sounds horrible. But I assumed that would be great and that would be something that I would want to do. But what I ended up finding out, and every pit is different, every person's different. For me, A lot of times I found some of my briskets getting a little drier towards the back end of the cook. And what it was the heat source was coming from the bottom. And I was basically doing fat side up. And my meat was taking the brunt of all the heat the whole time. So, and the other thing that I found along the way that I didn't like was, you know, when it came to spritzing and saucing and all of that type of stuff, whatever, I would do so much love to the fat side. You know, I'm spritzing the fat side, I'm making the fat side all pretty, and then as soon as I'm all done cooking, I flip that baby over. The meat side's all, you know, more or less been sitting in juice, it's been sitting in the moisture, and it's not as pretty. It's not got all that love and attention, and I don't have that crust all over it. So then once I start switching it over and I start putting the fat side down, I found that the fat for me worked as a good barrier to not help my meat dry out or get hard or anything like that. But then on the back end, the other thing I liked was now I had my meat side always sitting up. It was my presentation side. It was the one that I was taking care of and babying throughout the whole cook. And for me, it just came out a lot better once I made those changes. So that's what we'll be doing today. We're just going to keep digging through and get off, like I said, the majority of the silver skin. These long strands of it, when you do it that way, will kind of help you out as far as not taking quite as long to do it. But this is something tedious. You know, it's weird. You hear a lot of pit masters, and I have to agree. It actually becomes almost therapeutic. You know, you enjoy trimming your brisket. It becomes something that's almost an art on getting it right, or, you know, getting it to where you want it to be. But some of the big things that I learned, and it really did affect the cook, which something I just kind of always was taken back, was how much all the little things always matter when you're talking about barbecuing. Leaving the meat out, letting it come up to temperature, so on and so forth. You know, even the way that I started to trim my brisket, which I'm showing you right now, made a difference in how my briskets were coming out. It made a difference in my final product. Really what it came down to is what we're doing, and a lot of people will use this technique, putting the hand under the brisket, lifts it up a little bit, makes it a lot easier to just kind of shave off the top, and then also obviously putting your hands out of harm's way so you don't cut yourself. But making those trims to this brisket, really what it's all about is we're making it more aerodynamic. We're going to make it to the point where the smoke is just rolling over the top of this thing. We're making it more even in size, so that way that it actually cooks more evenly. And that way it also lends us to not burning certain spots, or drying out certain spots, so on and so forth. You kind of get an idea now. You see what we're doing? Getting rid of a lot of this silver skin on this side. I still got a lot more to do. This side's looking decent. Some of that in the middle I'll probably end up leaving. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we'll clean up some. But yeah, as we get this thing to be more aerodynamic, we get some of this fat off. That's just going to help us with cooking it evenly, getting seasoned and rub all over, and then also getting us a pretty bark all over. You really can't get bark on fat. Now, while it'll just end up later on rendering some, turning all juicy, and then basically it'll run right off. But getting some of this off the top, especially the silver skin, stuff like that, it'll allow us to create that nice deep bark that we like on brisket. And make us some good product on the back end as well. A couple more spots that I'm going to work through. This silver skin. Try not to gouge into it too much. Like I said, I try to go with the underneath. Pull up a small strand and then cut the opposite way as far as I can get it. And then usually you want to angle your knife up, so again, you're not digging too deep into the meat. Definitely we're going to take a little bit off of it, and that'll be fine. At the end of the day, it'll be plenty left. But I don't want to destroy a whole brisket. Now this silver skin and stuff, this will be things that I throw away. I personally don't keep it. It's part of the scraps that I don't really care so much about. But in the end, you'll see that it's really not that much silver skin that we're talking about if we're pulling off thin layers off the top. That's pretty decent. Obviously, there's a little more that's going to end up coming off. A lot of things, too, you can always do is as you pull on things, any loose edges, anything that's hanging off, you can go ahead and take that off of there. It's not going to last. And you think, sitting there as a scrappy edge, as soon as this thing gets to cooking, that'll be some of the first meat that burns up. or the first pieces of fat that burn off, you know. So you can get rid of that stuff right now. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to work through a little bit of that deco. I like this thicker knife for stuff like that. I'm going to start me a little pile, and I'll make sure I let you know what this looks like as far as this pile of stuff that I'm cutting off once we get it. And all I'm doing, shaving it down. I'm about to make this a nice smooth groove. A smooth groove. Now, there was a time when I would do all my brisket trim with this knife here. I was able to get that in. It worked out great too. But you, like I said, you can use totally what you have. Just make sure it's sharp. Sharper knife will save you so much time on the back end. Give you a cleaner product. All I'm doing is just taking off a little bit of this excess. Trim up some of these scruffles. One thing you'll see a lot of times, people will usually always rubbing their hand over, and it's more or less just to see what it feels like. You can feel hard spots. I can feel this deco fat over here. You also can feel when things feel off. You know, more or less what we're doing right now is we're kind of shaping it for what it's going to look like when we actually put it on the pit and when it actually does the full-on cook. What is that going to look like? So now let's talk about, like we did, or as we talked about, let's clean up this edge. I'll try to turn it from the side so you can actually see it itself. So all I'm going to do is basically go ahead and take off this whole edge, because I'm going to start with a nice clean edge of meat. Get off some of that stuff that was washed. And then also give me a nice straight edge. Okay, so we're going to be keeping that. I'll take off some of the extra fat, kind of throw it over into my fat pile. And I do want some fat that I'm saving on these little trimmings, because when I'm doing sausage and stuff, you need a good amount of fat with that too. So all of that, this is going to get saved in my little meat bag that I keep in the freezer from brisket trimmings, and that's where that's going. So I got 3 piles going. I got a true scrap pile. I got me a pile of fat that's going to turn into tallow. And now I'm starting me a pile of meat that's going to get put into my bag to be saving. So later on, I'll be able to do sausage, do ground beef, whatever have you. If you've never saved your scraps and actually put together, did you some ground beef, maybe made yourself a brisket burger, you're missing out. I mean, think back to when I first started cooking and smoking and everything. You know, like everybody else, I didn't know what I was doing and trying to figure out how to just get something that actually tasted well. Let's flip it. And I threw away so much good product, but I didn't know what to do with it. Now, I don't hardly throw away anything when I make brisket. There's very little that actually goes in the trash. I do got a dog as well, so with that said, some of that stuff that I don't want to necessarily eat, even once it's done, I will pass on to him, so he gets a little something. But one way or another now, we use a lot more of it than we used to. So let's look at this. And you'll see these, and for the most part, all the briskets look the same, but with that said, they'll all be different. Sometimes this will be sitting up really high and it'll be really thick. What I've learned, I like to cut it off. I think it makes for, most of the time it's usually majority fat. So I just kind of hang it up, pull it towards you, and I'm just going to cut it. Because again, we're trying to get this thing uniform. I mean, in that whole thing, we didn't lose that much meat. I can feel that this is more of the slimy, thickening fat. This isn't the stuff that I want to eat. So once again, I'm going to cut the majority of that slimy fat off of there. Just so I can have more or less the meat being one chunk. And there's still obviously some fat and everything on there. This is what I'll keep to be ground. This, like I said, I don't want that to be on anybody's plate, and I don't want to sit there and let all of that have to juice through and be on my grill. So what I will do, toss it over here. We'll see what we can render out of it. All right. So now we're looking at this back side. I'm gonna go back. Well, before I do, let's hit some more of these deco spots. Hard fat, and I'm gonna flip it around so it'll be on your side. I got my hard fat here and through there. Now remember, think of it as we don't want to cut. I want to shave. I just want to take a little bit off because I don't want to end up tapping into the meat. I do want to still have me a layer of fat to protect this meat. Now with that said, if you do end up cutting into the meat, you see a little bit of it, almost like right here where you can see some of the meat. It's all right. If anything, you can back out a little bit, and then you know pretty much that's your line. That's where you want to go, nothing further. Just try to stay away from gouging the meat. And all we're doing is taking it off. We'll make this fat more uniform. We toss it over here into my fat pile. It's more or less trying to even out this fat in all the other areas. We want this thing to sit on the pit pretty level and not so much have any of those ramps, high spots, so on and so forth. They'll just be the ones that actually catch all the heat and become those little cliffhangers that get burnt off. Just get me some nice clean tops to play with. And again, for some, they will totally skip all of this as far as really trimming off too much of the fat, and they'll leave the majority of it right on there, and their briskets come out amazing. So if you want to keep more of the fat, you always can. Always can. Like everything, when you're talking about barbecuing, it's personal preference, and then there's also just comes out to what does the best as far as with cooking. But a lot of it comes down to what is your palate like? What is your family like? This is what we like. Here with old Killer Miller. So this is how I do it. I like trimming it down so there's not a ton afterwards for me to get rid of. Like I was saying with that tallow, it'll help me with moisture and making sure that I didn't necessarily dry out along the way. And along the way too, we're also going to be spritzing the top and everything like normal. Once we get us a good color, we'll wrap that baby up. And then usually that's going to help us with keeping quite a bit of the moisture. Alright. Let's flip it. Make sure I clean up my edge. I want that to be nice and straight. Okay, so I'm going to show you the other side. Some of this we're going to get rid of. It'll come out of there pretty easy. It's almost like a little eye. So usually what I'll do, and it'll let you. A lot of this stuff, if you do a couple light cuts into it, you'll almost be able to pull it and pinch it and get a lot of it to come right off. So I'm just pulling it towards me, pulling it out of there. And again, it helps me from not having to gouge into the meat to get rid of some of that fat. Let's throw that over there, see if we can't render some of that out. This is always fun doing this from the opposite side I normally would, but basically I'm going to just get me a deep cut in there. A couple of light ones at the bottom so I can give me a good pinch hold in. Make sure I'm always more or less with the fat. I'm going to cut it out. Got nice long cuts away from the body. There we go. Just pull and cut it out. And again, we didn't take much product. This is basically all fat. I don't want to go too deep into there. So I got some of this stringy fat that I'm going to cut off just to kind of clean up. Personal preference. Probably don't really have to. And I feel like sometimes you can get caught up in these things, trimming the brisket, and you get into perfectionist mode and you be trimming all day. that. And just a little of this stuff right here. Feels a little hard. There we go. Let's get some of that off so we don't have a ramp. Right. So this brisket, when we started, was a little bit over, about a little over 14.5 pounds. Easily, once I get done trimming it, we'll be down to around 13.5 probably. Okay. We are looking good. Like I said, not perfect. We just got some of that stuff cleaned out of there. Out of that cavity and into our piles. I'm gonna let you know what we got. Okay, so basically, what I want to do is I want to trim here and circle this thing off. And then, like I said, these edges will save. And then what I'll be doing is using those and adding those to my scrap pile. And this is actually a bigger corner here. That probably would have been okay. But with that said, I want to make sure that it's even. Now, if I'm going to get rid of one side, I want to get rid of the other. This side didn't need a ton. You can see how much smaller this side was. This wouldn't have made it. Let's get rid of it now. It'd be much better on the back end because of. And then let's just make sure you're nice and squared off. Is there anything else you need to take off of there? Do it now. Make sure you're even. And pretty much, this is what I want to get to, or what I've learned for me, gives me some of my best result with my brisket. So here's the finished product. Everything that we're looking at. Rounded off those edges. So now we kind of got that circular look. And now we're going to get the heat coming in and swoosh right over the meat. More or less smooth and easy. You can see we brought that deco area down. Clinked out that extra fat in there. Rounded off our front end edges. So now we're a little bit more even all the way around. Get a little bit more even cooked. Clinked up our edges over here as well. Let's look at what we took off. There is our tallow. This is the majority of what we took off. So for what it's worth, while we might have looked like we were doing quite a bit of trimming, no product. That's the majority of everything. When I was doing that silver skin on the front side, meat side, this is all that got taken off. So, I mean, if you do a good job with getting that silver skin off of there, you really don't take that much meat. Now here are my meat trimmings. These were some of those corner pieces from when we just made everything more aerodynamic. Some of the side pieces when we were kind of taking off some of that gray meat that had been washed when it was initially cut at the meat packing place or whatever have you. And then just some general, I believe that was off that ear from the very beginning where we kind of cut it down to make everything even. But all in all, this is what I call the product, or things where I'm like, I'm going to actually get something from it. So that's my brisket scraps. There's all my fat for the tallow. And that right there, I'll probably be tossing. Some people probably use this and add this into the scraps that they're going to actually be blending up into the ground beef. I'll go ahead and toss it. I won't even worry about it so much. Probably wouldn't hurt, but that's where we're at. So that's our finished product. Part 2 is going to be how we smoke this. Of course, I already got my smoker coming up to temp. We're going to start this baby off at about 225, but I want to give you a first video on just the basics. The anatomy of it, how do we get here, how do we get it set up to actually get there, the next big key that I'll throw out in this video, and then we'll jump into part 2, will be giving your meat time to rest, to absorb the rub, and to come up to room temperature before we actually get it on the smoker. For me, I'm done. I'm gonna be leaving this baby out. In the next video, we'll start with a slather, we'll start with the actual rub, and then from there, after about an hour or so, I'll get it on the pit. I appreciate you tuning in. All right, barbecue family, that's a wrap. I wanted to give you a little something to show you that basic brisket trim and kind of get you started. If you haven't, make sure that you like and subscribe, and also check out part 2 so you can actually see how this brisket comes out on the back end. Until next time, keep smoking.